Hi guys, Olive here today to bring you my February 2018 wrap-up and tell you what I'm currently reading. As you can probably tell from my inclusion of a currently reading component in this wrap-up video, I did not get as much reading done during the month of February as I had originally intended. It's been kind of a when it rains it pours type of situation when it comes to my life off of the internet. I am not purposefully trying to be vague about what's going on in my life. I just kind of need to get through it before I really feel able to talk about it. But despite everything else going on in my life, I did manage to finish 5 books in the month of February, so I would like to discuss those with you and tell you about the approximately 5 million books that I am currently in the middle of. The first book I finished during the month of February was Gulp, Adventures on the Elementary Canal by Mary Roach. I have been meaning to pick up a Mary Roach book for a really long time since she is a beloved nonfiction writer, especially on the internet, and on a whim, I decided on Gulp. When I first picked this book up, I was under the impression that this was going to be an in-depth look at human digestion. But in actuality, this book was a mixture of facts, case studies, and anecdotes about really anything to do with digestion in any species. This book was certainly very humorous since Mary Roach has a fantastic sense of humor, but I found the information that was presented within this book to be really scattered and all over the place to the point that it made it really difficult to retain anything that she was presenting. Most of the things that I remember from this book are things that I have learned in other books that deal with digestion or taste, such as Cork Dork. From what people tell me and from what I read on Goodreads, it seems as though people are in agreement that Mary Roach's other books are a lot stronger than this one. I certainly hope that's the case because this was a very lukewarm introduction to an author whose work I legitimately thought I was going to love. The next book I finished in February was my pick off of my Young Professional TBR, and that was Mistakes I Made at Work. 25 influential women reflect on what they got out of getting it wrong, edited by Jessica McCall. I had really high expectations for this book, and it did not disappoint in the least. This is a collection of essays written by influential women in a variety of different fields. So you have engineers, writers, high-level executives, financial experts, doctors, teachers, lawyers. Since you're hearing from women in such diverse fields, you get to hear about so many different perspectives and experiences. It really made this reading experience very valuable, and it certainly gave this book a leg up over one of my favorite nonfiction books of all time, Selfish, Shallow, and Self-Absorbed. That book is also an essay collection in which writers, and writers exclusively, are discussing their decision not to have children. But since you're only ever hearing from writers, it really narrows the perspective. You would think that with the title of Mistakes I Made at Work, that some of these stories would be cringeworthy, like, oh, that time I smack-talked my boss at the water cooler. Wasn't that a bad idea? But this book is nothing like that. These are real women's stories about the journeys they've taken on their careers that they can now look back on with a whole new perspective and with gained wisdom. And they use those stories to give advice to the reader. Each essay is deeply personal. Like, you can just feel how personal each of these stories is. And surprisingly, it's never preachy. I should also say that although this book is very clearly directed towards women, since all of these essays are written by women and from a woman's perspective, this is by no means something that only women can gain something from reading. These are general life lessons, and very little of the advice in this book is woman-specific. But since these experiences are coming from a woman's perspective, and in many cases a woman of color's perspective, you can see the added challenges that were part of those experiences. Nothing can make that clearer than hearing real stories from real women. I have to say that one of the coolest things about reading the stories from these women was hearing about how they earned their credentials. Very frequently, we are presented with a person's list of credentials and their degrees, and it all seems very impressive. But I really enjoyed seeing how these women earned all of those accomplishments. I think it's really easy to get intimidated by women who have accomplished so much and have so much to their name. But I think we all need to remember that there was a lot of struggle and a lot of hustle behind all that success. And a lot of these stories started with when I was beginning college or when I was dead ass broke. It really did make it clear just how much all of our careers are a journey and that none of us start in exactly the place that we want to end up. So it was a bit of a hey, if they can do it, maybe I can too kind of moment. I would provide you with some nuggets of wisdom that I've taken away from this book, but to do that would be to reduce them to the really stereotypical inspirational one-liners that all of us have heard before. And that is really not the takeaway from this book. But what I will do is tell you about one essay that I connected with in particular. To summarize it very briefly, there was a woman who was accepted to a very prestigious school and a prestigious program, and everyone was telling her how lucky she was. But when she started to do this program, she just really felt that it wasn't right for her. She was getting the gut feeling it wasn't right. So she left. And pretty much everyone told her what a mistake it was. I really connected with that story because it is so similar to my own. I moved to Pittsburgh with the man who became my husband to do a graduate program that I had been accepted to with nearly a full scholarship. And when I started, I knew it didn't feel right. I was getting that gut feeling that we all get sometimes of, this is not for me. This is not right. This is not what I want to do. This is not going to prepare me for the type of work that I want to do. Yet I was really torn about leaving. I had just left college, the land of external validation, and I had worked my ass off to get into grad school. So I didn't want to leave. I wanted it to be the right choice, even though I knew it wasn't. Just like the woman in the essay, I left the program, and I know now that it 100% was the right choice. Sometimes you just have to trust your gut. You are the one who knows what's right for you, and the only person you should be looking to impress is yourself. I recently got back in touch with one of my college professors from undergrad who knew about that situation a few years back. And when I told her about what I'm doing now and my current job situation, she said, "Oh, that sounds really impressive." First of all, I really don't think it's that impressive. And second of all, I hope that's not what she thought I was looking for from her. I don't need it to be impressive. This is the happiest I have ever been in my life. I don't feel the need to impress anyone. All of my validation comes from me now, and it's one of the most freeing feelings I have ever experienced. The reason why I provided this personal example is not only because I realize I don't really talk about anything involving my personal life on this channel, but I also wanted to make it clear just how deep some of these stories can hit. I really cannot recommend this book highly enough if you are a young professional or you're just looking to gain some perspective. To keep this warm, fuzzy feeling going, I will jump into talking about another book that I absolutely loved, and that was The Namesake by Jhumpa Lahiri. This was my random pick off of my TBR for the month that I chose in the Triad chapter tag that I did with 5 random books. This is a multi-generational tale of an immigrant family originally from India making a life for themselves in the States. We meet the 2 parents, Ashima and Ashok, when they are young. We see them go through an arranged marriage. We see them travel from India to Boston, where Ashok is studying. And then we see really the entirety of their life together. Toward the middle of the book, our focus shifts almost entirely away from Ashima and Ashok to their son, Gogol, who was named after Ashok's favorite writer, who he happened to be reading when he was nearly killed in a tragic accident. The name that they give their son, Gogol, is such an important part of this book. It is so by happenstance that he ends up with it, yet it is so imbued with meaning. Gogol rejects his name before he even really knows the meaning behind it, and it ends up being a pretty powerful symbol of his relationship with his parents' culture. From all of my readings on the subject, it seems that children of immigrant parents seem to straddle 2 worlds. There's their parents' world and their parents' culture, and the culture they experience at school. That world that they want to belong in and be accepted in, and yet they still also exist in their parents' world and in their parents' culture. The angst that Gogol faces in this novel took my understanding of and empathy for that divide to another level entirely. I felt so much for him, and I felt so connected to the family in this story. This book did what I love a good novel to do. It made me care, it made me think, and it made me truly sorry to see the book end. I suspect that this will be one of the best novels I read all year. The next book I finished in February was The Age of Innocence by Edith Wharton. This was a buddy read that I did with Britta, and this is a pick off of my Classics TBR for 2018. This is a story of love and high society in New York City at the turn of the last century. In this book, a young man, Newland Archer, is getting ready to marry his sweetheart slash a good match in everybody's eyes, May Welland. When May's cousin, Ellen, comes back into town after scandalously fleeing a bad husband in Europe, Newland and May hasten the announcement of their engagement to take some pressure off of May's family, who are choosing to support Ellen. In the beginning of the book, Newland supports Ellen in several different ways to help May's family weather the storm of this scandal, so to speak. New York City society at this time had very strict and unforgiving societal rules, and very much for this reason, Newland isn't a big fan of Ellen to begin with. This rigid society is all Newland has ever known, and he's very much shackled to it. But as he starts to spend more time with Ellen, who is not defiant of social convention, but certainly less concerned about it than everybody else, Newland starts to appreciate her and her way of life. As a result, Newland starts to find his engagement less exciting and more burdensome, and a love triangle begins to develop. I have to admit that I was originally interested in reading this book because quite a few years back there was a Gossip Girl episode in which they staged a theater production of The Age of Innocence, which if you know anything about that show, you know how fitting of a choice that was. But regardless of my original motivation to pick this up, I actually did end up really enjoying this book. It was certainly one of the most beautifully written books I've ever read. I said to Britta when we were reading this book, and we'll repeat it here since I really can't think of a better way to put it, that the language in this book almost smells floral. There's really nothing subtle about it. Her words are rich and elegant, like a thick icing. That part of the reading experience I loved. But the story, I grew to like less and less as the book went on. While we were reading, Britta and I actually disagreed on this next point I will bring up. But I did not buy Newland and Ellen being into one another. I truly felt that each of them liked what the other represented. Ellen wants the safety and familiarity of home after leaving a bad situation abroad. And Newland desperately wants to shake off the convention upon which everything in his life is structured. I never really believed that they actually loved the other person. They loved what the other person had to offer, not necessarily them. And I feel like if they were real people, they would have very quickly come to realize that that other person is not everything you envision them to be. I am certainly not sorry that I read this book, and reading it with Britta was just a fabulous experience. But it was not everything I wanted it to be, since a strong story is so important for me as a reader. And the last book that I finished in February was Bradstreet Gate by Robin Kerman. This was a spontaneous selection that was calling to me when I was in the mood for a good campus novel. The book follows 3 students at Harvard. There is the moderately sheltered Golden Girl Georgia, the emotionally manipulative yet fragile Alice, and the talented underdog Charlie. And we also follow a charming yet problematic new professor who begins teaching at Harvard as these 3 students begin school. These 4 people begin entangling themselves in dangerous and foolhardy ways, and when a student on campus winds up dead, everyone suspects this professor as having murdered her. Flash forward 10 years after this event, when a memorial is going to be held in this murdered student's honor, we get to see where all of these 4 individuals are at in their lives and how the death of this girl still continues to haunt them. It's hard for me to summarize my feelings about this book because I found it to be both memorable and forgettable all at once. Like, the synopsis I just gave made this story seem a whole lot more salacious than it actually is, but the characters in this book are phenomenal. Not one of the characters in this novel is typecasted, and that is very easy to do in a campus novel. Instead, each character is a fully formed individual who manages to be sympathetic and detestable all at the same time. It is because of these strong characters that I will have this book in my mind for a very long time, even if I'm never interested in rereading it. And then when it comes to what I am currently reading, I feel like I have at least 1 month every year where I manage to be in the middle of what feels like a million different books and not finishing anything. I started every book on my February TBR and then got stuck in the middle of all of them because I kept getting distracted by things in my everyday life. And then I am also reading 3 different books on my March TBR, so I am reading a total of 8 books right now. The ones from February are In the Restaurant, Society in Four Courses by Christophe Robert. Animals Strike Curious Poses by Elena Passarello. Red Clocks by Lainey Zumas. St. Petersburg by Jonathan Miles. And The River of No Return by B. Ridgway. And the March TBR books that I am currently reading include The French Girl by Litsy Elliott, Smarter, Faster, Better by Charles Duhigg, and Middlemarch by George Eliot. I'm hoping to make some good progress in at least a few of these books this week, so I am not currently sitting in the middle of so many books. If you've read any of these books, if you've heard about them, or if you now want to read them after hearing me talk about them, I would love to hear from you in the comment section below, or if you'd like to chat with me somewhere other than YouTube, I am on a variety of different places on social media, and the links to all of my profiles are linked in the description box below. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a wonderful day, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.